Shine Campus. What's going on, you guys? I hope everybody's having a good Sunday and has had a good weekend. That if you work on Mondays, you're ready to get back to the week. I feel like we got a cool topic going on today. So, why your marriage communication is failing? What's going on? How come my marriage communication is failing? Well, first of all, the reason why I think this is important is because um, when you look up, or when you look up, how come marriages fail? One of the reasons that is always on top of the list is people talk about communication being one of those top scenarios. And in our course that we put together, the Power Couple, we actually made that its own topic on its own day and got its own attention. And so we know that it's an important scenario. We know that it causes people a lot of problems, and then we also know the fix for it. So let me address a little bit about it today. So if you're struggling in your relationship to do the things that mean have good conversation, have productive conversation, have conversation that moves us forward, it's actually going to turn into a lot more because one of the things that we need to do as people is we need to be able to communicate. Everything about us says that you know that's part of our growth, and so we'll be missing something if we're not able to communicate with each other. And believe me, we end up seeking it out at some rate to be able to communicate and have the conversations that we need to have, or have the kind of communication or connection that we need to have that's not happening with our communication. So it's really a big deal for us to figure it out. And the one thing I like about what I'm going to describe to you guys is a simple, it's a simple kind of like concept for you to be able to have about what's going on. And then we could talk a little bit about how to do it differently. Okay, so the first thing that we'll talk about is, and this is not a blame game. This is like you do your own searching to figure out how you can make communication better in your relationship. If you listen to what I'm saying today and you say, oh, I'm going to go tell my partner, like, this is the reason our communication isn't working because they're not doing X, Y, and Z. That's not going to work. It's not going to go well. You're already messing up the communication thing. So I just want to clarify that. So the best thing you have to do, or the thing that would be the most productive, is for you to be able to say, okay, what is it that I need to be doing based on what Thomas is talking about? Okay. So, um, the first part of it is, are you creating an environment that is conducive to communicating in? Are you creating an environment that somebody wants to communicate in? And what I mean by that is there's a couple of ways that you can look at that. One is you might be hesitating to communicate, and that creates an environment where nobody wants to really talk. Or when communication comes to you that clashes with some of the things that you've experienced, or that makes you afraid, your reaction to that communication makes somebody put their forearms up, right? And so that's part of us creating um, a environment that is not helpful for us to grow. And the third thing would be is if when communication concepts are brought to you, if you're, and this is part of the clash, but it looks a little bit different. So one way would be having a reaction that's negative and heightened in fear and those kinds of things. But then the other one would be you somebody communicates with you and you downgrade or you degrade what their communication is. You devalue, don't make them feel special or seen in those moments. All three of those things help to create an environment that nobody wants to communicate in. Nobody wants to be a part of an environment where they're either feeling degraded when they have a conversation, they don't feel good or heightened or heard or seen. And nobody wants to have a conversation when there's going to be a reaction and it's easier just not to say anything, right? And nobody wants to have communication at a time where we always know that, man, this is going to mean hardship more than it's going to actually mean that we're going to move on something. So you have to ask yourself, am I creating an environment in my relationship that gives a cool platform, an arena, an area, an opportunity to have communication that actually builds us. We'll go into how to do that in a second. The second thing is, just because there's not an environment yet in your relationship, you have to be brave enough. And I'm saying brave because I think it takes a little bit of courage to, no matter what the landscape is in your relationship, to communicate all the things that are needed. So can you bring that to the table? So this is another side of the communication. Can I go with the communication that's needed to actually grow my relationship? So if I am either too shy about what's going on, like I don't want to say everything because it might create something else in the relationship, or if I am too afraid to say, you know what, I'm not going to say all the things because this might hurt feelings, it might be truth, or even if I'm too brave, right? At that point in time, if I'm too, I guess, above what needs to be said, like I start being more critical than anything else, if I start communicating that way, that's not going to be helpful either. So we have two sides now, and I think if we could just simplify it for our relationships, it's either, am I creating an environment that's helpful to building relationship, and am I actually communicating in a way that's helpful to building the relationship communication? Those two concepts you have to look at and be willing to say, man, that's what we're doing in our relationship that isn't actually allowing us to grow. And the reason it doubles down on the hardship is because um, what happens in our relationship is we need abundance from each other. Like I need my partner to be more all the time. My partner needs me to be more all the time. And when we sense that we're, either one of us would be going inside of a shell or not being the most that we possibly could be, that gets scary for us. Right. So we double down on, okay, I didn't communicate the first time, but now I'm creating a relationship hardship because I'm being smaller than what I'm supposed to be being in this relationship. So how do we move out of it, and what is the way out? Well, the way out is kind of similar to what I've already described, but we got to flip it around. Okay. So, um, do the things that mean create an environment. So, what does that look like? Well, the reason you're not creating an environment isn't because you're an evil person. The reason you're not creating an environment is because you haven't dealt with all of the hardship that you've experienced before that is being triggered in the now scenario. So I'll give you a common example that I see is like, let's say that it's a money scenario. If you are afraid of money scenarios for whatever reason in your past, either it was good and now you're not in a space that was good, or you always seem bad, whatever the reason is, right now, the scenario in your relationship might make it challenging for you to have an okay reaction whenever the money concept comes, right? And you all of a sudden just go after your partner, right? And if you just go after your partner on a little bit of communication about something they bring, let's say your partner says, you know what, um, I saw this bill, and the bill just triggers you, right? Now, if you haven't dealt with that trigger scenario, you're going to have these reactions, and it really could be anything. I use the money scenario, but it could be a thing where your partner is silent because they're having a hard time in their life, and you watch silence growing up as a hard thing, and you're like, man, this is the beginning of the end, right? When for your partner, it's just where they're at in this moment or in these last couple of days only, right? So now you're triggered though, and now you start creating this scenario of fear and challenge in the relationship, where you're not having the environment that says, hey, I wanted you to communicate with me because I'm going to be okay no matter what, right? You're not creating that. And so we create that by dealing with some of the things that we know that trigger us and where they come from. And we start doing a communication scenario that says, like, hey, when there is this scenario going on, what I notice about myself is I get this reaction. I know this isn't about you as much as your scenario is not about me. So can you help me through that, or can we stick together on those moments? Even though I might not be very good at those moments, I'm really working towards it because I recognize where it comes from, and most of it is not from here. So we need to get to a different solution with it, right? So if you can have more conversation like that, it's super helpful for you to resolve that issue. But then what have you done at the same time? You've communicated. So not only have you resolved or start to help resolve and retrain your body to be in a different circumstance, now you're out actually communicating at the same time. Okay, so that first thing is start creating that environment by knowing what you're going through. The second thing is um, don't allow your emotions of the moment to lead the environment that you're going to create in your relationship. There's a common saying that I use in therapy frequently, which is don't put agenda over the love that you have, right? And so in any given moment, you have to make sure that the love that you're trying to create in your relationship is way higher. So even though you might feel some kind of way, things may not be going the way that you want them to go, or you might be fearful of um, things not happening a certain way, or there's not going to be an outcome. I need you to trust that if you could actually create love, you're going to get all the outcomes that you need inside of your relationship. Okay, so that's the environment side. Can I do the environment side differently? The other side is being able to be brave enough to communicate. And here's what I'll say about this side of things: you can't allow a circumstance to determine who you're going to be. Your job in the relationship is to communicate at the highest possible level, period. Right? Whatever stops you from communicating, whatever it is that's keeping you in a place that says, I don't want to communicate with this person, undo that scenario, because you're really trying to pursue the highest version of yourself more than you're trying to win a certain circumstance. So it would be hard for me to hear like somebody come to me and say, I don't want to communicate because this person creates this in our life, or I don't want to communicate because then that's going to make this situation happen, right? I want you to know, or I want you to be thinking in your mind, I'm actually communicating at the highest possible version of myself. Like that's what I'm going for. I'm trying to give as much truth as possible. I'm trying to do things that I could talk about. I'm trying to be things that I could talk about. I want to just keep being able to communicate the best that I possibly can, right? And as you start doing that, and we put these two situations together, the idea that says I'm going to communicate at the highest possible rate that I can, and then also the idea that says I'm going to create an environment that's ready to have communication, all kinds of communication in it, then everything changes for us. At that point in time, everything changes. It's when we stay focused on what the other person is doing and focused on the things that we won't do based on what the situation looks like that our communication goes sour and stays sour, right? If you'll implement these two things and these concepts, you're going to have a good time in your relationship. Your relationship's going to keep growing. Even when it's difficult, what you're going to know is that, like, hey, we're going to get somewhere. This won't be the end. We got this. All right, you guys, enjoy your Sunday. We'll talk to you soon.